Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of MSPBusinessSchool.com. Today, you got your host, Rob Rogers, here, but my two cohorts are missing today. We got Brian Doyle and Tim McNeil are both out doing bigger and better things, I guess. But I have a special guest here today. We have Jake Carroll. How you doing, Jake?
Rob, I'm doing great. Thanks for having me again.
Yeah, it's always great to have you here. We love hearing all your sales strategies, Jake. You're always you're the best wordsmith I know.
Well, that's nice to hear. I hope I can I can continue that for the next 20 minutes.
Nothing like embarrassing you right off the rip.
Yeah, that's all right. No pressure.
All right. Well, everybody, today we're going to be talking about something a little bit different. We're going to be talking about co-managed IT and how you can implement this into your company, or maybe we can give you some tips and tricks today on how to better implement this in your company as it relates to prospecting. We're going to be going over things like the challenges and the opportunities, natural friction that may arise, the messaging and the nuances that need to be addressed, and credibility, trust, everything that has to do with trying to get your co-managed opportunity into a prospect's understanding and then have them eventually sign the deal. Is that about right, Jake?
Yeah, I think so. It's different enough that your approach in terms of how the account is handled from a sales and messaging perspective, all the way up to how it's serviced over time, is different than the typical messaging that the MSP could be like, hey, leave the IT to us, and you can go run your business. I mean, obviously that whole idea, it needs to be rethought when you're doing co-managed IT.
Yeah, I've always loved co-managed IT. I've always thought it was something that could really separate you from the crowd, and I think everybody's starting to move into this direction now. I would say, Jake, what 10 years ago, 8 years ago, the thought was maybe don't do co-managed IT. It's too complicated and too much friction, as you would say.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think if we think about all of the folks that we know that are in the managed service provider business, they all, some of them may have started their early careers as an employee of a managed service provider and then moved up to own one, or in many cases we see that a lot of folks are starting in this business coming from a corporate IT background, right?
Yeah.
They either got to the point where they'd exhausted what they could do at that company, weren't great at following orders from others, and decided to go start their own company in many cases. So there's certainly built-in knowledge of the challenges and the things that happen inside of a corporate company that has an internal IT department. So in terms of being able to truly understand the challenges that are happening inside that company, there's no lack of empathy in terms of most of the folks that we work with knowing exactly what happens inside those organizations and where they can help, and how they can, how can they improve the life of their customer with their co-managed IT offering, but also how to message it. Like, they know where all the bodies are buried, right? In terms of what internal IT can and can't do, generally speaking.
Yeah. I kind of wanted to jump into the challenges and the opportunities. There's massive opportunity to move into a larger market when you're going into these co-managed types of opportunities, and with that, you get better maturity in the business. You get a lot more streamlined systems. But one of the challenges that we always faced when we were doing these co-managed opportunities is you go in there and the IT department that's already there, they feel like you're, stepping on their toes.
Yeah.
And so, like, how do you kind of address that on your side? What have you seen work?
Yeah, I think that's a real consideration, right? We'd done a podcast recently, and we talked about, you have different talking points to different people inside the organization based on what their needs, fears, desires are, right? You can't speak the same way to a manager as you would to an owner, or as an employee as you would to a manager, right? Everybody's got different motivators and things that they're working toward in their role. And look, if we went with the standard outsourced IT messaging into an internal IT department, there's no way they're not going to feel threatened and that you're trying to disintermediate them and replace them in the company. So that does require a nuanced approach to the account on how you get into the account first, even start having a conversation, and then what that looks like, at least in the sales process or the pre-sales process, when you get in there. So yeah, there is some natural friction there, and you need to look. The sales is all about breaking down barriers, and friction to begin with, right? If you're really good at what you do in sales, it's all about making your prospect and customer feel really comfortable about telling you what it is they really want to achieve, what are the challenges that they're facing, and then determining whether or not you can solve those in a way that makes sense for them. So
Yeah.
this is really no different than that. It's just nuance in terms of the way that the IT services are traditionally delivered versus, what's going to happen in a co-managed environment.
Yeah, one of the ways that I used to do it was, I would ask them what do they enjoy about their job and what were the things that they wish they could give to somebody else,
Right.
and say that's what we want to help with. So, one of the things that IT people are really good at is like they're the superhero of the industry of the organization. They can fix and do things that everybody else can't do. Even the superheroes don't want to do some tasks. Like you'll have some people who just don't want to do the password resets again for the same person
Right.
again. We could take that off their plate. And so we would tell people that look, you work with all the things that you like to do, those high level big brain projects that give
Yeah.
you fulfillment in your job, and we'll take the menial tasks off your plate. Then there'd be other, IT professionals that love doing the day to day. They love going out and, like doing password resets and talking to people as they're doing all those things, but they really hate trying to figure out all those really big engineering level tasks that it bored them to death. We would take that off their plate. And so we once we carved out a niche of what they like to do versus what they didn't like to do, then we could have a conversation about, well, let us take that part away and you're basically going to be managing us while we're doing those tasks for them. So it gave them that heightened sense of ownership
Yeah.
and where they were, teaching people and having people work for them. So that was how we did it. How do you handle that kind of situation?
Well, in any situation where you're like, we do outsource sales management as a service, right?
Hmm.
And we have to have a different conversation with a company that has an internal sales manager than we would if it was an owner starting from scratch without a sales organization, right? Like we
Yeah.
wouldn't go into a sales manager and say, "Hey, we're outsourced sales management as a service. Isn't that great for you?" You probably, oh, hey, put your brakes on. I think that there are always learning what people like to do, want to do, are capable of doing, and get it right. I mean, it goes back to that old thing with that old thing, the entrepreneur playbook, right? EOS. It's like gets it, wants it, has
Yes.
capacity,
Yeah.
and I always think that in most cases where you're going to be able to penetrate is going to be where there is capacity and capability gaps, right? If someone was hired as a level 3 network engineer
Hmm.
to help a company that's expanding, ensure that the network infrastructure and architecture supports the company's growth, but can't get to those big projects because there's too much of the day to day. Make sure the machines are patched, make sure passwords are reset, make
Yeah.
sure the printers are printing, make sure the Wi-Fi is working. Right, those kinds of things are going to keep you from doing what you want to do. And I think whether it's your initial sales calls, or as you're working, you're going through your working relationship with your customer, understanding what people want to do, are capable of doing, have the capacity to get done. If there's gaps in coverage that align with what your best in best in breed practices are, then there's room for working together for sure, profitably.
Yeah.
So I think it's always about identifying where there's gaps, where what you do aligns and there's synergy, and making sure that if the company is going to stay with their internal IT department and work with an outsourced resource, that everybody knows exactly, why they're in the room, what they're there for, and the capabilities and the capacity that you're going to provide.
Sure. So, another thing that, as you're discussing that, it like kind of brought to my attention and I remembered one of the things that we always did when we had that conversation, a co-managed conversation, we always like opened up the hand grenade before the tech person could, saying the number one concern that they have when we're coming in the door is you're
Yeah.
going to take my job. You're here to take my job. And so I'm curious how you handled it, but the way that we handled it was while we were in discovering, while we were having the conversation, we would let them know that, hey, we're here to be, just like a feather in your cap, an arrow in your quiver to help you be more successful. We're not here to try and take over your job. That's not what we're here to do. We're here just to be a co-managed, and we would show them, a lot of our documentation where we worked with a lot of other companies in a co-managed environment that
Yeah.
had multi-year, engagements where the co-managed was working and working really well. How did you handle that number one concern of the influencer, which is, the tech department in that conversation?
So I think your final bullet there really hit the nail on the head. as salespeople or as business people, we can always tell people what we do, right? Um, this is what we've done successfully for the last 20 years. We do this, that, and the other thing. But you had mentioned referencing customers that you'd worked with before 7, 8 years where you've had success. I think the win here is in the storytelling, right? If what you do aligns, and the person that you signed on previously is in the same role as the person that you're talking to now, and you can very clearly articulate in a story, in a kind of a, you got to tell the story. Hey, we work with such, and tell them we work with such and such leader, IT leader at such and such company, and where we've had success over the last 7 or 8 years is here, 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 and here. Is that something that you'd be looking for, or is it something else? And then they have the agency to tell you whether or not they're comfortable with what you just told them, right? Or whether they're concentrating on something else. The answer doesn't really matter. You just want to know what the challenges are of this person, and if you can fill that gap or not, right? So I think the win is in the storytelling, not in the telling of the benefit of it, right? I think bring a relevant story of how you've helped another company with, and by the way, bring names, right? We all, most MSPs that we know sell locally or regionally. Chances are, if you're working with a well-known company, the person that you're talking to now is going to recognize that company as being in their marketplace and fairly well known. Bring it up.
So I got a question for you. So you said to discuss the company. Would you find an instance where you discussed a person
Yeah.
and how they leveled up in both their knowledge, their abilities, and maybe their their job title? Would you bring that up when you're talking to an influencer, or do you keep it to the company level?
No, I think role is really important, right? I mean, you don't want to talk to like if I were talking to the owner of the business, I wouldn't want to necessarily focus on 100%, how we help the IT department any more than I'd want to tell the
Sure.
IT guy who runs the IT department how we help the company. So I would bring the role in. I would bring the role that's relevant into the conversation. Maybe not by name, but certainly,
Okay.
hey, the director of IT at the other company that we're working with, kind of same level of skepticism that you have now. Here's what our relationship has looked like over the last 7 or 8 years. He started as the manager of IT. He's now the CIO for the company, and they're, in addition to working with us, he now has a bigger staff and more response. I mean, you can share all these stories, right?
Yep.
So I think you got to tell it, and you got to tell it truthfully, right? Don't make them up.
Well, of course. Yeah. Yeah.
That's the challenge.
Uh, okay, one last question here. So, we just had somebody ask us, like features as it relates to like the features and the benefits of this, this engagement. Are you big into discussing the features when you're having a discovery call of all the things that we can provide, or are you more of a global conversation when you're doing your storytelling? Do you care about 24/7 and no vacations and, expertise? Do you care about those things in your conversation, or are you bigger picture?
I think eventually you're gonna have to tell them what you do, right? And if that's 24/7, 365, we're gonna add scale to their organization. People who haven't been able to go on vacation in a while can go and leave their leave their phone at home and enjoy their time with their family. Those kinds of things are sort of table stakes. I tend to lead with the things that motivate people to actually make a decision, right? Which is pain, and mostly what's the penalty of the status quo or the penalty of inaction, right? POI rather than ROI, right? The benefits tend to talk to ROI, and this is an ever-changing landscape. And if you're walking into a company that has a single IT person, that's in our parlance, that's always single point of failure. You don't want it in a network, you don't want it on a computer, you don't want it in your financial statement, you don't want it anywhere in your organization. And if it's a business that's reliant on technology, a single IT person is a single port of failure in the organization, whether they're out sick, whether something they're too busy, whether they're under capacity, whether they don't have the skill to do a certain job. It's risk in the business, and no one wants to be in that position. So it makes you more vulnerable for everything when you're a single point of contact in an organization. As you said, even if you are the hero, sometimes there's kryptonite out there, and being
Sure.
a single point is not great. So no, I tend to talk about the things that risk mitigation, certainly to the business owner and to the person that you're talking to and trying to make comfortable with a co-managed situation. I think you've got to relate the stories of the things that have happened, and the concerns that other companies have had about having that one point in the company that was responsible for so much. So I would concentrate on those things.
Okay, so let me sum this up. Let me see if I got this. So if you're speaking to the influencer or the IT professional or the IT team,
Mm.
uh, you're mostly in that conversation. You're mostly going to alleviating their concerns by showing your expertise and showing your abilities that you were able to do with other companies. But if you were talking to a business owner, you're more into describing the ROI, the efficiencies of the systems and the ability to mitigate risk on the corporate level.
Yeah, I think companies are always about risk mitigation, higher profitability, making sure the balance sheet is right, and de-risking the business. And I think from an IT person's perspective, if you came from that environment or you've talked to enough customers that have the same kind of problems, you can articulate to them the things that are their challenges every day. And I think that's the thing that gets folks emotionally involved, right?
Okay.
I mean, and I think that's as a business person or salesperson, in order to get people to move now in particular, there's got to be an emotional attachment to the fix or the change, because everybody's going to burn either real capital and money in terms of changing, but also the internal political capital that it takes to make any change along these lines, right? Bringing in an IT service provider is not small. There's going to be new things that are happening in the company. It's going to affect everybody in the business. And, whether you're working with the owner and he's got to convince his staff to do it, or whether you're working with an influencer and he's got to bring that story to the business owner, somebody's walking into somebody's office and convincing them to do something that they're not doing now. And as a salesperson, they need to know going into that meeting that this is worth it.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, Jake, I really appreciate your time here jumping on with me. You were a fantastic co-host as always. And I wish you all the best. You're going next week, Thanksgiving's, right?
Home here, and people are coming to visit. So looking forward to it.
Good, good. All right. Well, Jake, I really appreciate your time here today. Thank you, everybody, and we'll catch you next week.
Yeah. Thanks, Rob. See you.
All right. Bye.